Hello and welcome to the FEZ show with your host, Giordmaina. I want to say a massive thank you to all of you for the great feedback that we've had so far. We've got plenty of topics again to talk about today, but remember, we have our subscriber goal of 1,000, so please remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you are enjoying the content. So joining me on today's show is once again William Dodds and new recruit to FEZ very recently, Jasmine Butler. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Jack.
No, it's good. I'm starting to really enjoy these shows over the last couple of days. It's been really good. As I said, feedback has been great. So as I said, lots to talk about today. So I hope you've been enjoying being on the show as well.
My first time, so let's see how it goes.
So let's see how it goes. Perfect. So the first topic I want to talk about today, so it came out the race obviously doing some great content in terms of getting out some news, and what they've talked about, which we thought was interesting, because on Monday we talked about the possibly finishing the season in Berlin and London as like maybe a doubleheader, pushing them back into August. But they've sort of looked at the Asian leg of the season. So the season that we've sort of missed, the Sanya, the Seoul, the Jakarta. So Formula E are possibly looking at a way to finish the season there in that port. What do you think of that?
Looking at today's news, it's potentially something that's more likely. Obviously, China have officially lifted the lockdown in Wuhan. So, you think come July, August time, perhaps they'll be ready to kind of open up the borders and allow Formula E to race there. Obviously, you do have the issue of the teams getting themselves there, and depending on what the situation is like where the teams are based, there is an issue. But to be honest, it looks like China and South Korea are potentially more on top of this situation than we are in Europe. So at this point, a race in China or a race in South Korea looks more likely than going to Berlin, Rome and London, especially given that the Excel Centre Hospital has only just opened today, I think, or maybe yesterday.
Yeah, and I think you were saying off camera actually that it has the first patient actually was admitted to it today.
Yeah, and I know we were discussing, it'll be quite quick to take down relatively to opening up, because obviously it took a number of weeks to get the hospital set up. But I do think at this point, racing in Sanya and Seoul appears more likely. The only thing you have to consider is just like we don't quite know how this is going to progress in Europe. I mean, the signs are that potentially things are getting slightly better in France and in Italy. And I think the first inclination that potentially the curve is flattening in London. But when you compare that to Seoul and China, I think that it looks like they're definitely ahead of us on this.
Well, yes, and obviously they did get the coronavirus first, so it's actually an interesting time frame to see how, when they contracted it back in December, January time to where we are now. So it's been about 4 months. So if we put that into our perspective, we sort of got it like February. So you're sort of looking at, your June, July's in terms of when we're possibly going to be better. So that sort of takes Berlin out of the equation of possibly being ready on June 21st. But what I think is really interesting, Jasmine, is that it looks like we were discussing it on Monday that Formula E are open to this possibility of pushing back the season to August, September time, which, we sort of revealed earlier when Formula E didn't want to do that. They didn't want to go into September because they were worried about the Season 7 powertrains and testing, which was booked in Valencia in the middle of October. So what do you think? I want to ask really about Berlin and London. Do you think, obviously, those two tracks aren't on specific street circuits at all? So I don't see an issue with pushing either Berlin and London, say, into that August or September gap. And then possibly, if the Asian leg of the championship is possible, we could do a Berlin-London, a mini European season, and then finish the season with an Asian leg.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happen. Obviously, with Berlin and London, they are much easier to rearrange than the street races, and it would be much easier if at the end of the season they had them all closer together, kind of maybe doing one weekend after another. I think the only issue you're going to have is, will they be able to have fans? Will the teams be able to fly in? With, as you've said, with China now calming down, and you've got South Korea now calming down with the coronavirus, are we going to be able to have the fans, the teams that are coming from, X, Y, and Z? That's, to me, I think that's just going to be the main issue. Rearranging them, I think, is going to be quite easy with it calming down. Just, are you going to get everyone there?
I know this is a problem that Monaco obviously faces in Formula One, and obviously it was on the calendar last year, but they only have a small window in the year where basically the residents essentially are happy to have motor racing. But I do think one of the advantages of motorsport is that obviously it's not ideal, but motorsport is a sport that potentially lends itself more to being held behind closed doors. I don't think the spectacle is affected to the same extent as it is in say, football or rugby or kind of stadium sports. I think that the TV experience isn't massively worsened by the fact that it would be behind closed doors. So I think it could work.
No, as I said, I was going to bring on that subject actually, because you said, I think on Monday, that it depends on the city as well. It's like Monaco, like they only like that racing period in May, hence why the Formula One race has been cancelled and it's not going to be rescheduled for any time this season now that it's been postponed. It has officially been cancelled. So with Sanya, with Seoul, obviously, Seoul is obviously a major city, so is Jakarta, it's the capital of Indonesia. So finding a time period or a period where they could, especially after what we've just gone through, to say, right, we're going to now put a race here actually in the city centre that has been on the lockdown under for the massive health reasons that we've had. It seems unlikely. That's the only sort of issue I sort of have with it, is that it's really soon after we've sort of like called it, yes, we're fine, okay, let's have a race. I just feel like it's really quick.
I guess the factor is like that is definitely true, and that is a real concern. But you still have that slight concern with Berlin and London too. So Tempelhof Airport is a public space in Berlin, other than when it be used for the race. So that there is still going to be inconvenience there, and obviously with the Excel Centre, the Excel Centre will also have a stockpile, a list of events that kind of unable to happen during this period as well. Formula E isn't the only thing that will be held there, so it's still going to be kind of like an administrative difficulty getting those two races held.
Yeah, for sure. For example, the XL, it has events basically every weekend. I remember, me and Jasmine went to the same uni actually, so going past Custom House XL, we used to go on our route to uni. It had a different event. There was, at Canning Town Station, which on the tube, sorry, it was filled with people going to the XL Centre every day with some sort of event. So even squeezing Formula E at a different location on the weekend, it's going to be a challenge, Jasmine.
Yeah, definitely. I've been on there on a Friday when they had the motorbike show, and they've literally had to push people onto the DLR to get them off. So it is a very busy location. They have an event nearly every day, whether it's something as big as a Formula E race, or they've had little uni events and things like that going on there. So I can see how it can be difficult to rearrange with every other event going on, but I'd probably say something like a Formula E race might be one of the most profitable to the XL. Obviously, they have announced this week that they are giving the XL Centre to the NHS free of charge. So maybe after this is all over, they might think, okay, what's going to give us the most profit? And I would assume a Formula E race would be on top of that pile.
I actually was laughing with my friend, well, not laughing, it's obviously a pretty unpleasant situation, but when they're filming the Nightingale Hospital on the BBC News, there's actually a huge banner advertising the Formula E race just behind where the newsreader was standing. And just thinking the amount of like free exposure that the event's getting, even though it may never actually take place, is pretty extraordinary.
It's true, but what I think is interesting is that Formula E are obviously really open now to pushing the calendar back, going into September and August. And also, again, what the race sort of came out with yesterday was that testing could go back to Donington just for logistical reasons, and doing that in November. So actually moving testing back a month gives us a bit more of a window to finish season 6 and then move maybe into season 7, maybe a shorter window, because normally we have day October, then we've got that 2-month window till Saudi Arabia in December. Maybe we might be looking at testing in Donington in November, possibly then a race a couple of weeks later, very similar to Formula 1 in Saudi Arabia, or possibly maybe moving season 7 as a completely just a 2021 season and maybe starting it in January. What do you make of that, possibly going back to Donington, and how that opens up the calendar, Will?
I think that in theory it's a good idea. I think giving us as much space to complete the 2020 or 2019-20 season as is a good idea. I think giving that space is the best thing. I think it's most important that we get to those 6 events and make sure we have a proper championship with a proper number of races and a proper winner. I guess one of the only concerns is that track conditions in November in Donington might not be too similar to many of the places that we're going to be racing in. So, if they're going from testing the cars in November in the UK, it's going to be quite cold, and I think that will kind of potentially bring up a number of issues for the cars, especially if they're then travelling to race in Saudi Arabia, kind of just a few months later. So, I think that's a potential concern I have, but I think that in terms of giving a space to finish the current season, and Donington is already used. It was previously used to store the cars. I see that
Yes.
Neo still have a temporary facility there as well. I think that makes sense in that sense, but I just worry about November in the UK being cold. Is that going to be advantageous for the teams looking to test potentially at this point an entirely new car?
Yeah, I agree, Jasmine. Of course, it'd be minus. It could in November in this country. It could be freezing point. So they could be going out to test, and it's sub-zero temperatures.
Yeah, that would be my only issue with Donington, and we know what the weather's like in the UK. One day it can be sunny, and the next day it can be freezing cold. So, especially with it not even October, it's November. November is a winter month, and in the UK that can sometimes mean, not very often, but can sometimes mean snow and things like that on the road. So if they've done all this work to rearrange testing and then it's extreme weather conditions, where are they going to go from there? Are they just going to cancel testing? Have they got a backup plan in case there is severe weather in the UK? It's a bit, maybe if they'd done it October they could get away with it, but November it is quite risky having it in the UK.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It'd be great in a sense for us because obviously we'd be able to send someone down to testing probably around that time, but at the same time it's gonna be really difficult because obviously the temperature will play a massive factor, and then you're going from you're testing in a really cold environment to then putting the car in a completely boiling hot temperatures in Saudi Arabia potentially a month later. Like, you're going to test the car, it's going to be really cold, and then you don't really know what your car might be like when you get to Saudi Arabia, when you're actually faced with temperatures that you're going to see throughout the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, Formula E generally races in hot conditions. It goes to countries during their summer, and it just won't be used to that if we're testing at Donington. Obviously, this is an unprecedented situation, and if this is what they think is the best solution and what's most practical for the teams, it might have to be. And I guess it is the same for everyone. It's not going to be kind of like 3 or 4 teams testing in Donington and the rest testing in Valencia. So I guess that if this is the best solution, it will have to work, and I'm sure the teams will find a way of working around it. But it could result in fun, unpredictable racing if the teams are kind of coming to the first race and they haven't had proper testing time.
Personally, I think Valencia is still the main place for them to go testing. It's just I don't think they know if Spain is going to be ready. So I think Donington is very much a backup plan, and maybe Donington said, well, maybe November might be the best time for you to do it if worst comes to worst. So, but I still honestly believe Formula E will go to Valencia for testing. When that will be, I don't know, but I think they're just monitoring the situation in Spain and see how that goes. So I want to move on now. I think we want to talk about Daniel Abt, actually, because obviously Daniel Abt was under severe pressure last season to keep his seat, and he got the call really late. He actually, unprecedented, no driver has ever done this. He actually spoke to Formula E themselves and said, I don't have a drive for season 6 with Audi. A couple of weeks before the season actually concluded. And obviously he did get the seat because he's obviously still at Audi for season 6. But there was immense pressure going into him at the start of the season. And obviously Dragon have taken an Audi driver in Nico Müller, who was tipped to possibly replace Daniel Abt in their Audi car. So I think now this massive gap that we've had, and possibly with Audi also not having probably their best car that they've created. I have a feeling that this period might have saved Daniel Abt, because let's say, okay, the season's been okay. He's picked up some points. I think he's picked up just a couple. I think 6 points in total. Obviously, Degrassi has done a great job so far this season, but I'm just thinking that this gap might have saved him, because if we've only got 1 or 2 races left before the end of the season, let's say, then moving on or saying that you didn't really get a fair shot with this massive gap is a bit unfair to just kick a driver out. So I think this gap might actually save Daniel Abt.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think he probably won't be the only driver who potentially kind of can see this as a bit of like an opportunity to reset and potentially extend their career in Formula E for a bit longer. He's definitely under pressure. I think that he's been with Audi since the beginning, but always very much shown up and very much the second driver compared to Lucas Degrassi. Lucas Degrassi is obviously a Formula E champion and an incredibly accomplished driver in this sport, so that's not necessarily a slight on Abt, but I think that there will be hopes that he can achieve more with his equipment than perhaps he has, especially over the last year or so. This season's definitely been a huge disappointment. I think he's only had one scoring finish, and while the Audi hasn't, we discussed this on Monday, the Audi hasn't been as strong this season as it has in the past. It's still, again, showing the difference between him and Degrassi, because Degrassi's still able to get that car in the points on a regular basis. Then you look at someone like Nico Müller, who as you said, was an Audi driver in DTM and actually beat his teammate Robin Freins in DTM last season. That shows just kind of what kind of level of driver Müller has the potential to be. And while he hasn't made a huge impression at GX Dragon, I think that he would be a potentially really good driver in Formula E if he had the equipment, and Audi compared to GX Dragon is certainly that. So yeah, I think for now Abt is safe, but if we've only got a couple more races till the end of the season, I don't think that development's going on at the moment, so there are chances that Audi's not going to really improve between now and the end of the season. If we come back, for a couple of races just to finish the season off, and Abt still is lagging behind Degrassi and failing to score points, then I definitely see potential for them to start looking at someone like Müller.
Yeah, to be honest with you made a really good point for Robin Freins there, because obviously he's still an Audi driver, obviously still races in DTM for them, and obviously I don't think Virgin Racing would be very happy if Audi came knocking on the door and say, can we have our driver back, please, and to put him in the car. But Jasmine, I think, maybe Müller was the sort of main target there, but, could you see Audi maybe knocking on the door of Virgin of Robin Freins and say, hey, do you want to actually drive in the main factory Audi for Formula E?
It's a difficult one to choose. I think if you had a full season of both drivers, Daniel Abt's probably not going to be the more popular contender, because if you see so far, he has only scored points in one race. He's retired from a few. He hasn't done so well, but then at the same time, it's hard to tell. He might have, gone to the next race, turned it round, started to get a few more podiums, a few more points. So it's quite, at this present time, it's difficult to tell, because the other end of the scale, the Miller could have then gone and had a terrible half of the rest of the season. So it's always a bit up in air at the moment, difficult to say. As we've mentioned before, we don't know whether there's going to be many changes after this season if only 6 races go ahead. So it's quite difficult to comment at this moment.
No, I agree, because obviously I know we've sort of picked on Daniel Abt and sorry Abt, but it's just obviously a topic of conversation that came in before the season, that he was a driver that had to perform this season, otherwise that seat at Audi could be someone else's. And I just think that this gap has probably saved him, probably given him a chance to have another full season to show, because obviously he's a good driver. You have to remember, he's a race winner. He's put the car on pole. He put the car on pole in season 1 in Long Beach. So he's a really good driver, and he has proved it. He has shone at Audi, but it's just, as I said, when you've got Lucas Degrassi being as consistent as Lucas Degrassi's been, and Abt's not there as well, being that super consistent, it raises those questions. And I know Daniel Abt knows that, but I think he's not the only driver. We're looking at the rookies like your Brendan Hartleys, your James Colados, who haven't got to grips with Formula E very quickly, but they might be saved as well going into next season, simply because there hasn't been that many racing, or there's been that big gap, so they've sort of lost that simulation time, they've lost that time to prepare and get used to the car.
It's definitely not necessarily a slight on Abt to say that he hasn't been able to live up to the performance of someone like Lucas Di Grassi, because Di Grassi is and has been one of the most consistent performers in Formula E ever since he joined the series. And I think look at someone like Andre Lotterer, who wasn't able to keep up with Jean-Eric Verne, and then he goes to Porsche and he's putting it in Superpole, and he's showing just how quick he was, and that's a reflection of how difficult it is for these drivers to compete with people like Verne and Di Grassi, who are just like undisputably some of the best drivers in the sport. So I do think there will be a bit of a kind of saving grace, and people will just be like, this season has been a bit of a mess, completely out of anyone's control. And I think that some drivers will get a reprieve. I don't know how much you can really read into what Hartley and Muller have done, because I don't think that we have a reliable benchmark for that Geox Dragon car to say what it could achieve. They could be doing a really good job, because we don't know how good drivers those guys are in Formula E. I think the reason that maybe someone like Abt and Collado are coming under pressure is because there is a reliable benchmark next to them, and they're not living up to that benchmark. The same with Neil Jarni at Porsche. So that's probably the thing that will put those guys under pressure, is because they are just significantly, not performing to the same level as their teammates. Whereas I think someone like Muller and Hartley will definitely get a bit more slack.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But to be honest with you, I'd be surprised. I know it's a massive silly season. I suppose we've got like 2 months to talk about silly season at this rate. But at the same time, I can't see much movement in seats unless drivers walk away, or drivers say they don't want to continue for whatever reason, which I highly doubt. Or unless teams are actually willing to say, you know what, in those first 5-6 races, you didn't cut it, so we're gonna sign someone else for next season. I just think with the development rate, there's it's gonna be quite rushed when we get back into when everything is green and we're okay to go racing again. I think you've got the private manufacturer testing to fit in, you've got to finish the season, then you've got testing. It's all going to come at a really quick pace, and then getting a rookie driver, for example, who has no experience in Formula E, up to speed, it isn't going to happen, I don't think. I just don't think. I know some drivers like Nick de Vries, for example, Oliver Rowland, who took Pascal Wehrlein, who took to Formula E like a duck takes to water, but at the same time, it's a risk trying to find a driver and to see if they can do that plug in and play like those 3 drivers have done. So it'll be interesting to see how silly season does develop over the next couple of weeks and months, and obviously we'll follow it the best we can. But I don't expect much to come from it.
Well, I guess, Jack, one thing to consider is, this is what we discussed on Monday, is that, have someone like Oliver Turvey, who is, kind of going around in one of the worst cars in Formula E at the moment. Is he going to be available? And I think that there's definitely some intrigue there to be seen. But I do agree that I imagine they'll be on the side of caution and maybe not going to take a risk on a rookie. But when you have someone like Turvey kind of available potentially, maybe there are some moves to be made.
You might be right, to be honest with you. It could be that you might see switch of more experienced drivers who haven't had that opportunity, like Turvey, for example, who might, jump our seat, for example, and might push a rookie who hasn't maybe performed out of a particular seat. But I suppose that just remains to be seen. So final topic I want to talk about is the qualifying system, because obviously it's so talked about. The drivers hate it, but they understand why we do it, and you get the same moaning cue for the drivers that are in Group 1, although Oliver Rowland, we spoke to him on Monday actually, and he said that you find actually that the ones who moan about it the most are actually the ones that aren't as good at it and dealing with the Group 1 pressures. But what I want to discuss, Jasmine, is obviously the qualifying system as it is is that the best one that we have? Jerome D'Ambrosio told us that he wanted like a one-shot qualifying system, very F1 2005, where the championship leader would go out first, do his lap, and then the second and third and fourth would go out. So it'd be one by one system. You get one lap, boom, that's your qualifying lap, and then whoever's at the back of the championship goes out last. So in theory, still gets the better of the track conditions to try and still mix it up. What do you think of our qualifying system? And if you were to change it, what would you change it to?
I think with that idea that's mentioned, that is it is a good idea, but at the same time, things happen in qualifying that a lot of the drivers like to have 3, 4, 5 goes at it at a time frame because the tires might not be ready, the car itself might have a few niggles, so it might need a few laps to be able to get the car going to get the fastest lap. It is the way it is at the moment. As myself being a spectator, I do enjoy it. I do enjoy, it's kind of like Formula One, but it's not, where you've got all the drivers then go out, then it goes down to the final 6 and they all shoot out. That way, as a spectator, I enjoy it. I enjoy watching it. I think it brings up a bit more excitement, and even if someone has been the fastest throughout qualifying, they could end up. I think it's happened to Mitch Evans once, where he was consistently fastest throughout the whole weekend. He got down to the final 6, and then his I think his lap time was about 3/10 after the final flag. So that kind of, it wasn't great for him, but it made the race a bit more exciting. Going into the race, you could see that he's obviously going to want to be gunning for it because his qualifying wasn't as good. So that way, I do quite enjoy it. I think if you have it just where one driver gets one lap, it's all about the competition. You should be able to do your best lap first chance, but not every driver can. So I can see where that might not be the best option.
Yeah, because Formula E, they obviously, drivers say you just get that one lap, because obviously the first lap is warming up the car potentially, even if you choose to do it at 200, and then you get your 250 lap, and obviously the car's a completely different beast at 250 than it is at 200. So they said it's a really hard managing act to get the car together. What do you think, Will? How do you assess the qualifying system?
I'm a really big fan of it. Like Jasmine said, I think it brings a level of jeopardy and an intrigue to the qualifying, and it just creates slightly, it's a big part of the reason that Formula E racing is so exciting. And I like the way that it's quite divergent from what Formula One do. Formula One is very much a system set up to ensure that the best cars and the best drivers make it to the kind of front of the grid. And while that is potentially kind of what people want to see in terms of seeing kind of drivers performing at their peak, I think what Formula E has going for it is that you get Mitch Evans having to start from the back of the grid and cut his way through the field, and you have these drivers and really good drivers and really good cars kind of having to make moves, and you've got people like Turvey and Superpole because he's kind of coming from Group 4, and I think that's a really kind of, it adds a lot of layers and interest to the sport, and I think it's a unique part of Formula E and something that they should be looking to hold on to. I think even with a one-shot qualifying system that D'Ambrosio proposed in your interview with him, there's still issues with track conditions, and people going out. He said doing it in championship order. There's still going to be people complaining about track conditions. There's still going to be issues going on. So, the drivers don't like it, but it's consistent. If you're in the top 6, you're in Group 1. And I think that's simple and understood and fair.
Yeah, and the thing is that, track conditions obviously about, I think with the Ambrosio interview, he was more about traffic. So interesting with the Mitch Evans situation where they were all backing up and then he misses his qualifying lap. So that's why I think sort of suggested that one lap qualifying system. So there is no traffic. You're going to get your lap done. okay, you're not going to miss out in that sense, but you can't complain about traffic, but you still have the worst track conditions. It was interesting because I've spoken to Alexander Sims recently as well, and he wasn't surprised about the track conditions because, you know, in FP2, they do the fastest lap times of the weekend in FP2. The fastest lap times are not done in qualifying, but he just says the track activity that in that hour between practice 2 and qualifying is so like mad in terms of you've got like tons of i8 BMW i8 cars doing passenger rides. You might have the iPace trophies go out and they all run on different lines, so they all drag the dirt on, they all, you know, even Sim said the, you know, the i8 cars, they might drift around a corner just to make it a bit more exciting for the passengers, so that brings all the dust onto this racing line for a Formula E car. So he said simply because it's not a Formula E car going through the racing line, it just makes the track so dirty. So he said he wasn't surprised by how the conditions changed so drastically from FP2 to qualifying. But also I have to agree with the storylines. It does make those storylines our qualifying system. You know, to Oliver Turvey getting into Superpole in Santiago, what a storyline. Mitch Evans missing out in Marrakesh because of that traffic and having to go through the field. And I even remember John-Eric Vernon Superpole in Marrakesh again, as Marrakesh seems to be like a big one for qualifying, missing out on Superpole because he didn't get out of the pit lane in time. It creates these storylines that, you know, grip the fans and the viewers, I suppose, to watch the race at 4 o'clock in a couple of hours' time. Because I suppose if it was the fastest man on pole every weekend in a normal qualifying system, which is just to find the fastest driver, maybe it wouldn't make the races as interesting as they are at this precise moment. So it is a battle. I suppose it's just widely debated because the drivers just moan about it all the time, and until you feel like a change is done, even if we have this season 3-4 years down the line, I still think the drivers are going to complain about it and say it's too hard and it's not fair and there's too much traffic and every excuse that they could give under the sun. I still think that would continue. But I think we're going to wrap up the show here. Thank you so much, Will and Jasmine, for coming on. I hope you really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you so much for you as well watching. We'll be back tomorrow for another installment of the FEZ show. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe. We're trying to get that 1,000 subscriber goal, so we'd really appreciate that if you're enjoying the content. And we will see you tomorrow. You've been watching the FEZ show. Goodbye.